this is the picture that started everything. I saw this pattern piece next to this jacket, and I wondered, how can you make a whole jacket out of one single pattern piece? So I investigated.
This is not a costume. This is not a costume. This is just how I would like to dress every day.
This jacket was designed around 1750. It has only one pattern piece. It takes about a couple hours to make, and when I first found the pattern, I did not understand how it worked. What you're looking at is called a jambayah, or at least that's the name that Gustaf Trolle-Bonde gave it in the book where this photograph was published. I haven't found this term used anywhere else, which is part of what made this object interesting to me. It sits outside of standard categories, doesn't have a tidy label, it's just something that someone made around 1750 in Sweden, and it survived. But the silhouette is truly what I'm here to talk about, because it's the thing that stopped me when I found this. It has this very dramatic A-line skirt that flares from the waist. It looks very structured, very fitted. It looks like something that requires complex pattern drafting. But then you look at the construction diagram and you realize just how simple this piece truly is. It's a cross. The front and back are one piece, and it's folded at the shoulder. The side panels are these curved shapes that, when sewn in, create all of that flare without a single dart. There is no waist shaping cut into the pattern. The fit comes entirely from the geometry of how these pieces meet each other. This is the thing that I found interesting with pre-industrial garment construction. The makers were not working around limitations. They were working with a completely different logic. Less fitting and more geometry, very forward. With historical garments, most projects start with a garment and work backwards to a pattern. This one was the other way around. I had the pattern and I had to reverse engineer everything else. And the one thing about this jacket that I kept coming back to was the front opening. There is no closure, no buttons, no buttonholes, and no visible fastening of any kind on the outside. The front edges simply meet in the center front, which raises an obvious question: how does it stay closed? For this period, there are a few likely answers. The most common was interior hooks and eyes, hardware that was functional but hidden. A second possibility is straight pins. Now, it sounds very strange, but in the 18th century, this was very much normal. Pinning your clothing closed was not just a fix, it was a widely used fastening method. Or it may have simply been worn open to show what's underneath. I actually contacted the museum to ask if there's any surviving hardware on the original, and if I hear back, I will let you know. For this project, I wanted a fabric that felt true to the original, which is why I'm going for this Damascus patterned medium weight fabric. For a modern version, you could use brocade, a textured cotton, even a wool coating if you wanted something with a bit more structure. The original was quilted, which I'll talk about in a moment, but the base construction works in any woven fabric with some body to it. I scaled up the pattern from the diagram in the book if you want to make this yourself to adjust the proportions to your measurements. The main variables are the length from the shoulder to the hem and then the length across the back. It's always a smart idea to compare with the pattern that fits you well, just to make sure that you're not over or under scaling. This is the front, this is the back, this is a fold. So there's a total of 3 seams, 2 side seams, and 1 back seam. Magic. The fabric you see on the screen was exceptionally beautiful, but had a couple holes that made the cutting process a bit slower. Luckily for me, I was able to cut around all of them. And that's it. And just like that, we've got the bodice. This was extremely fast. I can see the shapes already. There is one decision that I ended up regretting, and that is the thread color. I went with a dark green that did not quite match the tone of the fabric, and this is the exact moment that I was deliberating between that dark green and a golden yellow, which, in retrospect, I think would have added a nice contrast. I've been enjoying hemming before sewing the seams, so I'm gonna get it done, and then we're gonna see the magic happen. Like I mentioned, the original is quilted, and that quilting is where a lot of the texture comes from. I chose not to quilt my version, partly because this fabric did not need it, and partly because adding that process would have buried the thing I wanted to show most, which is just how straightforward this construction actually is. The trickiest part, and I feel like it's not that tricky, is to distinguish the front from the back and the sides from the front and the back. I have marked mine just to make sure that I don't sew the wrong panels together. It is now time to tackle one of 3 seams, and we're going to start off with the back seam. This curve seems to be very gentle, and I hope it's forgiving because I don't want to be clipping the seam allowance. With one seam down, it was time to tackle the 2 remaining. This project was the quickest project I've ever worked on. In fact, if I wasn't filming, I'm sure I would have been able to wrap this up in a couple hours. The curves were gentle enough that I didn't have to clip the seams. I just serged them and moved on, which is actually very much medieval in spirit. Medieval tailors were not precious about interiors. They chose their fabric wisely and left the raw seams untouched. The outside was the point. I'm gonna blur this because I don't want to spoil the surprise. I'm going to try it on. This is the moment that I look forward to every time I make a historical piece, when the flat construction suddenly becomes 3-dimensional and you can see all of the details. There are certain things that I will do differently the next time, but at least I know that there's going to be a next time. In hindsight, I wish I had made a toile, and not because anything went wrong. I love how this turned out, but because once I saw it finished, I immediately knew what I would like to change. The sizing could be different, and there are details I would have loved to embellish. And a 12 would have given me that first conversation with the garment before I made any final decision. Going back to the process, I decided to finish all edges with facing, which is what ended up taking most of the time. Medieval tailors would have done a simple turned hem, about a centimeter, hand stitched down. You could also use a narrow bias binding if you want a cleaner edge or a slight contrast. But like I said earlier, medieval tailors were all about exterior. The project moved faster than expected, so I used the extra time to try something new, installing hooks and eyes by machine. Now, this technique works, but my execution needs a lot of practice. Most of them ended up looking a bit wonky, but I think it adds charm. And that's it. I gave the facing a very good press and stitched it down by hand using an invisible stitch. What I want you to take from this is that this is not just a jacket pattern, though I hope some of you make it. It is the underlying idea that historical construction methods seem to be more complicated than what they truly are. The jambayah is a jacket with no complex fitting and no specialist equipment. It was made by hand in the 18th century, and it still works. I have to admit that this is not the most comfortable jacket I've worn, but that's mainly because I ended up underscaling the pattern. One of the questions I get most often with historical pieces is, do you actually wear this? And I think this jacket is one of the easier answers to that question because this silhouette is very modern. I personally will be altering this pattern to fit some of my preferences, especially increase the width of the sleeves. But that also means that I will be remaking this jacket in the future. In the meantime, I'm very curious to know, would you wear this or is it just a costume?